Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar session. My name is Jeff Gavio. I'm the Director of Marketing here at 3HTI. And leading today's discussion is going to be industry veteran Gary Hoffman. A little bit of background on Gary's experience. He started his career with PTC in the early 90s, was a top salesperson for them. And then about 20 years ago, actually about 20 and a half years ago, as we just celebrated our 20th anniversary, Gary founded 3HTI, and we are a platinum level PTC partner. We've been doing this. Gary's been working in the ecosystem, obviously, for about 30 years now, and he's got a lot of experience with the various iterations of PTC's CAD products, going all the way back to Wildfire and through Pro Engineer and to the current iterations of Creo. So one of the things that we like to offer to our customers as a PTC partner is a little bit of additional knowledge or guidance on what's actually included in the various packages of Creo and whether or not there's any technology that you might be able to use or might help you do your job or execute your design processes a little bit faster or easier that you might not be aware of at the moment. So Gary's going to dive into the various packages of Creo today and give us a walkthrough of all the features and functionality that's included within those various packages. If you have any questions or commentary, feel free to use the Q&A or chat options, and we'll answer those questions during the conversation. And then, of course, we'll also leave a little bit of time at the end if you have any follow-up. So, Gary, feel free to take it away here.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. It's a pleasure. And I think when you're younger, you want to be older. And when you're older, you want to be younger. So I know that makes sense to some of you guys. Probably some it does and some it doesn't. But I guess it's good to have all the experience. The good news is I started when I was 10 years old. So anyway, welcome everybody. And we'll be probably pretty quick to go through this. But as Jeff said, I've been around for a while. And I think back in the day, if anybody's familiar with Pro Engineer, which is what this used to be called, the game. So I had worked, as Jeff said, for PTC for about a decade in the 90s. And the game that we played was, hey, come and buy software, pay up front, kind of like a big, fee to join a country club. And then you have to pay your annual dues, so to speak, to use the place. So you had your buy-in fee and away it went. And that was traditionally the way that software was sold. What I would say today is, at least for our company, any software that we buy, whether it's Office 365, if it's Adobe that you're looking at here, or if it's voice over IP, Salesforce, anything, we do software as a service and we do subscription. So it's the way software is modernly distributed today. I was actually running some numbers for our company. And if you look at the revenue that we do with software on an annual basis, 93% is subscription and 7% is still the old-fashioned perpetual maintenance. So we still do perpetual maintenance, but it's slowly fading away. And I think it's been a really good transition with PTC and with us over the last 5 years. So back to where I was, we would sell these packages. And what happened was PTC would release new software. And now Creo is released about every year. Back then, it was about every 6 months, and we would release new software and we would say, put sheet metal in this. And if you wanted sheet metal, we either would charge you to upgrade your package. So your base license, we would go back and upgrade that and charge you money every time you wanted something new. Or every once in a while, what would happen would be there would be more of a minor piece of functionality that would come out. And ultimately, what would happen would be is that you would get that for free as part of what you have. So where things have changed today is PTC only sells subscription software. As I mentioned, we still do provide maintenance for some people that don't want to switch, and that's fine. So ultimately, the beauty about what we have, number one, just like Office 365, in our subscription, we have Teams and we have Yammer and all this other stuff. If you want to use it, it's all there. Quite honestly, we're probably guilty, like some of our customers, that we don't know what's in there and we don't make usage of it, which is the purpose of today's session. But ultimately, what's great is that if you buy too much or you buy too little, then you can change that at will with subscription. So ultimately, if you buy too much and you want to scale back the configuration. And ultimately what we sell is we sell configurations. And you guys may be aware of this, but you can use any version or multiple versions of Creo with this configuration. So you're able to do that depending on what you need to be collaborative or be able to share data with your clients or suppliers or whatnot. So in any event, the beauty is that you can, on an annual basis, remix the subscription. And then, so if you want it to be less or more, if for some reason halfway through it, some of these licenses you're going to see are either floating or locked, some are just locked to a specific node or a computer. And let's just say, for example, you buy a node lock license, you have somebody else that wants to share that on the network. You want to change that. It's 6 months into your subscription period. And just by the way, subscription periods are either 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years. What happens is you just pay the delta for the prorated amount of time, and you now have a floating license. So anyway, just to kind of give you some background, again, in my world, having done this for a long time, it always stinks that there's new functionality that's included in a newly created configuration. And throughout the years, PTC has had, numerous configurations. It's kind of like if you have an older model car and they go from an 8-speed transmission to a 10-speed transmission, unless you trade it in and get a new one, you're not going to get the 10-speed transmission. The beauty with this is, you want to switch the license, you want to reconfigure that to be the newer configuration that comes out, then you can get the 10-speed transition. And generally, there's no extra cost for that. So I think that's a huge bonus of being on subscription and the way that things work. What I'm also going to dive into is there's a lot of stuff that actually comes with subscription that you typically would have spent a lot of extra money for. What we see is by people and standardizing on it, then all of their people have access to some of this data or some of this functionality. Some of the people need it, some of the people don't need it, but we've actually received very, very good reviews. So just to dive in a little bit more. So what PTC has is they effectively have 5 different configurations. These have different names. Some people like the numerical name, T1, T2, etc. Ultimately, what you find is that these have different, functional features. And ultimately, you spend more money, you get other features. So it's no different than any type of thing you purchase. I was actually thinking about buying a drone, and they all look cheap when they come out. But if you want the advanced stuff, then you have to move up to a more expensive configuration. What we can do in this event is that we can sell individual pieces of this either by themselves, and they can float from package to package, or we can just, add them. You can buy essentially this T1 package, which is called Creo Design Essentials. And if you want to add geometric dimensioning and tolerancing advisor, you can just add that a la carte. So that's the general makeup of what we have. Let me just pull up some Excel. So this is a sheet that I made. I think it's important. And if anybody wants a copy of this, we'd be more than happy to get it to you. What's interesting is that we have all the names in here by alphabetical order. These are the packages, so we probably should put numbers in here, T1, T2, and so forth. On this tab, there's a little key, and some of this, because I go back and I'm probably a relic, but there's ultimately, we'll call it a key of, hey, what is Pro Sheet Metal Design? So for you guys that were around in the Pro Engineer days, it's still the same basic thing, but it gives you a little bit of a description of what's in here. A big thing that I think that what I'll call separates the men from the boys is this advanced assembly extension. And ultimately, this is something that allows you to have, I think people kind of get this confused a little bit. And they get it confused a little bit because ultimately what happens is they're like, well, gee, I only make a few parts in my assembly. And what it does, it actually allows you to do things like copy geometry. So even if you're making a mold cavity and you want to have an inheritance feature, this would be something that you would actually need for that to create geometry. It allows you to create products, we'll call them, from a top-down perspective, as opposed to a bottom-up perspective. What it also does, if you have teams of people working on the same assemblies it allows you the ability to go in and have people, like, let's say one person work on, one side of it and the other person to work on the other side of it simultaneously. You can kind of read that. Do you have, assemblies in your teams? It also starts with, global layouts, various other things as far as laying things out. So I'll just kind of, so there's definitions of what some of this stuff ultimately is there for help. And as I said, I think that's a key one. We'll get to that in a second because we have it right here. But as far as just kind of running down this, and PTC, like most companies, has their own nomenclature, and ultimately they'll, try to, you have to kind of learn their language. But anyway, so one of the best days of my year is when a customer calls and, hey, we want to buy this. And I know this sounds a little goofy, but we want to buy this. Well, we're not going to sell it to you. And they all of a sudden, look at us kind of cockeyed. And what do you mean? Well, remember when we talked you into going with subscription, we said you'd get a lot of stuff. And now's where that pays off, because you actually already have that functionality that you're now going to need for this project that you didn't know you were going to need. So that's something for me that's really exciting. And that, again, that's part of what you get when you have subscription. You do get a bunch of stuff, whether you need it or not. You don't know. I'm a guy that likes tools, hardware tools, and, I buy things and never think I'm going to use them. And all of a sudden there's some, nut that's in a strange position or something I have to do. And, voila, thank God I bought that thing. Anyway, Creo Parametric is really just the basic parametric modeling, the really core of the system, which everybody knows. It's, how you create parametric associative feature-based modeling. And just for whatever this is worth, is that we technically sell 3 different CAD packages, being one of the largest representatives of PTC in the world. So we sell Creo Parametric. And just to confuse you, we also sell Creo Design Essentials. And what's the difference there? Creo Design Essentials is the old Co-Create that PTC acquired about 12 years ago. Creo Parametric is ultimately Creo with Co-Create kind of mixed in, and I'll get to that in a second. We also sell Onshape, which is a newer SaaS-based product from the 2 guys that were the founders of SolidWorks. But today we're talking about Creo Parametric, and sometimes when you just say the word Creo, it gets confusing. Is it ultimately Creo Design Essentials, or is it Creo Parametric? But today it's Creo Parametric, which we'll call it the old Pro E. This augmented reality design share is pretty interesting. One of the things that I look at is we have the ability to make a fully defined virtual model. That fully defined virtual model now has the ability to be put into a very lightweight viewer. And ultimately what happens is that can be consumed by a lot of people that don't speak orthographic projection and other things. And it's a way for you to really communicate and speed things up. Augmented reality design share ultimately is the ability for somebody to do what's called mixed reality today. So one of the things PTC does is they get into augmented reality, mixed reality, which is where they're taking their CAD model and they're able to actually overlay that onto physical. And you can view that with your phone, you can view it with a tablet, you can view that with RealWare, Microsoft HoloLens, things like that. So it may not be a big deal, but back in the day when we would put a 3D model up and we'd spin it around and we'd shade it, and all of a sudden it was, oh my God, that's amazing. So what's great today is this is just another deliverable in which you can actually go and output for other people to consume. And it's pretty neat if you have a customer and they want to see what the model looks like in a certain environment. It's really pretty cool. One of the things, and I'm not sure where it is in here, I guess it should be advanced rendering. And I think this is something that I really, quite honestly, I'm a little bit, naive about. Our company is one of the, largest resellers for Keyshot. Keyshot is very, very well known for photorealistic rendering and videos and things of that nature. And at the end of the day, here it is here, we are ultimately supplying a license of Keyshot inside of Creo. And, when you really go down to a separately purchased license of Keyshot versus what's in here, this is almost the same stuff. So, again, the rendering, is it a big deal for certain people, certain consumers of that data? It is a big deal. Assembly performance extension. Since I've been talking about assemblies, back in the day, long story, I'll give you the short version, but, SolidWorks came out and they were the Pro E killer. And, the one knock was that Pro E was so expensive. And what PTC did, I remember it, in June of 1998, they actually were selling Pro Engineer for $59.95. But what PTC did was they stripped out all the assembly capability. So we do have a few customers, very, very few, that actually still have these old packages, believe it or not, from the late 90s. We just swapped somebody last year finally. And what PTC did was that really didn't work. So what they did is in assembly performance, they put some assembly capabilities, things like shrink wrap, simplified representations, things of this. So you can actually perform assemblies, you can do things to strip out some of the information. And that's what this is. And I've kind of already led you down what's the difference in this basic assembly that's in this package versus the advanced assembly. Advanced framework, for some people, this is useful. It's basically the ability to miter steel profiles, so I-beams and C-channels and things like that. If you're trying to connect them and miter them together, there's a lot of different tools for this, and people that work with extrusions. So for some clients, this is useful. Some you'd never have a need for it. Cabling is an interesting one because cabling was something that we always sold separately. We do, and I think PTC has a lot of clients in the electronic packaging space. So we actually provide full-blown cabling and full-blown piping. And we're actually just analyzing a prospective client that has SolidWorks, and lo and behold, they do not offer this in the basic packages, which is interesting. So flexible modeling, and I'd mentioned that the co-create stuff that came into this. Ultimately, what happened with these next set of things here is Creo, like Pro Engineer, is feature-based solid modeling, where ultimately you have parent-child relationships, features are intelligent, they go in a certain order, and what came before it affects what came after it. Everything is tied together parametrically, hence PTC's former name. With this, the creation of Creo, Co-Create ultimately had the ability to do what I would call geometrical manipulation. So back in my day, before I worked at PTC, that's how you did things. Everything was either 2D or 3D geometrical manipulation. What Creo flexible modeling does is it gives you the ability to manipulate geometry, not with parameters, but actual physical geometry. And why is that important? So we have a piece of software here called Creo Unite. Creo Unite will allow you to natively open up any CAD file. So if it's SolidWorks, it's NX, it's Inventor, etc., you can go click on it. It then comes in as a Creo part. It's an unintelligent solid at that rate. And what flexible modeling does, it allows you to do things like patterning, add features. It allows you to actually give features intelligence. And it's really neat stuff. For me, in my history, I have clients that have been with me for 30 years. They don't know anything about this. This is newfangled stuff. When you educate them on this, it's like, oh my God, because they might have a feature that comes very late in the late phase design change. And now you don't have to go through all the complexity of, hey, what the heck is in, how did I set this thing up with all the family, the relationships, parent-child relationships. And again, what people should be able to do is work in a heterogeneous environment where if you bring in something from SolidWorks that changes, you've built something based upon the reference geometry, then your assembly is going to change. And that's really what this stuff ultimately does. Freestyle is a little bit different. Again, it's really kind of from the Co-Create, where it uses a concept called subdivisional surface modeling. So imagine I'm an industrial designer by trade, and we used to use a thing in college, this will be a brain hurt, called plastilina. So you'd have a big blob of clay. And you can imagine this is sort of like clay where you're pushing and pulling, and you're creating this very organic geometry. Pretty neat stuff. And just for whatever it's worth, if you have Creo and you don't have Creo Design Essentials, but you have an older package, whatever one of the older packages would be called, you would be able to get Freestyle Design because that would be included in the software. That would not be an extension, or as we used to call it, a module. Flexible modeling would be, and this would come with a more modern configuration. Detail, pretty simple. How do you take a 3D model and do a orthographically projected or isometric 3D drawing with dimensions? That's detail. Design animation, ultimately, do you want to automate, you want to animate specifically range of motion, things of that nature. Pretty useful stuff. Design exploration was something that PTC tried selling for a while. We had somebody that worked here. Unfortunately, they passed away, longtime user since 1989. And he thought design exploration was the cat's meow, that was the best thing since sliced bread. What's neat about it is that you can explore a lot of variants. When I was doing industrial design, it was always, I want to see, a chair with 5 legs, or I want to see a chair with 4 legs or 3 legs. And you can very, very quickly come up with a lot of different alternatives, which are great for design, exploring different designs. ECAD is ultimately a CAD interface to, it's a CAD interface to electrical CAD systems, PC board layout systems, things of that nature. It uses like an IDF interface. So you want to bring a 2D board in from Altium, something like that. You can bring it in, you create a 3-dimensional component, and then you can package that. Pro Feature is kind of a throwback to the very, very early days. And that was the piece of functionality that ultimately gave you the ability to create rounds and shells and drafts and things like that. So that obviously comes with everything. With the cabling, what happened is with this is Harness Manufacturing Lite, we do sell 3 different full versions of this specific product. Beyond this, this is something that PTC kind of gives away for free, which gives you a bit of a teaser. Hey, once I create the 3-dimensional pipe or harness, how do I actually do a lay flat and put that down to kind of do a pegboard for manufacturing? Interface, I'm going to kind of cover most of these guys. Interface is ultimately STEP, IGES, DXF, all that good stuff. And we do actually include specific interfaces to CADS 5 is probably long gone. That was something that PTC acquired, but you can see it's CATIA, it's STEP, it's various other things. Import Data Doctor was really to try to take imported data and to try to clean it. Some of this is a little bit old. I think flexible modeling actually helps that. And I don't really see a lot of people today actually taking 2D drawings and trying to build up 3D models, but that's what that is. Intelligent Fastener, I think, is a really good thing because you got a lot of fasteners. You want to fill them in. You want a library. It's an automated way to put fasteners in your designs. Library Access, I'm kind of laughing at this. That's a throwback to many, many moons ago. But PTC, we used to sell libraries of electrical symbols and bolts, nuts, screws, Woodruff keys, all kinds of fun stuff. And that's the piece that actually allows you to create libraries. Today, do people, use the pre-made libraries? Not usually. They're going to catalogs, getting them offline, et cetera. This legacy data, I kind of talked about that with the Import Data Doctor. That's where you would be able to manipulate other stuff. Human factors, neat stuff. Being an industrial designer, we know all about human factors, but that ultimately gives you the ability to have anthropomorphic models, aka people, 5th percentile, 50th percentile, 95th percentile, stuff like that. And, to be able to put them in and be able to design around them. Same thing with the analysis, lets you do range of motions, things of that nature. Mechanism design. Mechanism allows you to go through range of motion for mechanisms. And to try to explain this, this is just going to let you do range of motion analysis and checking. In these more expensive packages over here, we do use mechanism dynamics extension. So that's how you actually take the forces that are actually on that you're doing in your range of motion studies. Those forces you can actually transfer to a structural analysis. So there's a little bit of a difference here. This one costs money. This one comes with it. I think it's a pretty useful thing if anything you're doing has any articulation whatsoever. Model check. Model check, I think, is something that was actually developed by a company called RAND back in the day. It was something that was very popular. Today, a lot of people don't use it. I will tell you, if you're a CATIA user and you're doing work for Airbus, there is a now German product called QChecker that costs about $20,000, that if you're submitting a CATIA model to Airbus, it has to run through this QChecker to make sure that it has certain integrity and it's been built to certain standards. What I see today with a lot of clients is there really is not great training, and ultimately everybody kind of builds things their own way. And I think when you have a purely parametric model, you can really create a mess, and some of the data, the IP long-term, can really become a mess. So we've actually implemented this for clients. It used to be something that cost money. Today it comes with it. But the beauty about this is that you can put certain standards that you want everybody to adhere to. It's sort of like spell check. And if those standards, if you bring a contractor in or somebody else, if the models aren't built to those certain standards, this will actually flag it. So useful stuff. Again, is it widely used? Not really. Should it be? Yes. Mold Analysis Lite. PTC is partnered with, I forget the name of the company, but off the top of my head, Moldex 3D, excuse me. And ultimately, this is something that takes a Newtonian fluid, which is water, and looks to see if it's something that's going to go into the cavity and core, if it's going to have issues. It's not going to do warp and a lot more sophisticated stuff, but we do have other things that would when I say other things, other packages of mold analysis that would be able to do the more sophisticated stuff. Piping, we already covered. Plot, it's kind of a goofy one, but Plot, back in the day, before we had a lot of functionality in like 1990, we would sell Pro Calcom, Pro Versatech, and Pro HBGL. There's something from the past. So today, I mean, obviously you're going to be able to print, and that's what that is. That it used to be $1,000 option way back when, where you would get all three of what I just mentioned, or you could buy them individually for $500. So software has changed quite a bit. SolidWorks Collaboration is the ability to take models outside of Creo and put them into a SolidWorks format. It is not something that gives intelligence to the model. They're going to be an unintelligent model. Reports, something where ultimately we want to list the bill of materials because you built an assembly that has 30 parts, and you want to be able to list those parts on a sheet. That's what report does. Scan tools is interesting because it allows you to take Cartesian coordinate data that's been scanned, laser scanned, whatever it is, and it allows the noisy, X, Y, and Z points to be smoothed out. This is somewhat older technology that PTC is kind of packaged in. Ultimately, we have other technology that ultimately PTC co-brands Geomagic from 3D Systems, and that's really what we use. It's called reverse engineering extension. But frankly, some of this stuff, PTC developed. They figured it was better just to go with Leader in terms of third-party tools, and that's what they've done. And some of this they package in. Schematics Lite is something that we offer the full-blown schematics. Schematics ultimately is a 2D tool because P&ID for piping and schematics for electrical is something that's 2D. What's great is that we have a nice system that does it in 2D. It does it by intelligence of remembering the traces in the 2D lines. Ultimately, what you're trying to create, your deliverable, is a wire list or a list of pipes. And then really what you're trying to do is to try to bring that into piping and or cabling and be able to pick off and have some electromechanical engineer three-dimensionally route those. Sheet metal, I covered this, that's all part of every license, but what sheet metal does is it ultimately gets in and folds and unfolds and rolls and unrolls and allows you to put different bend features on the product as far as how things join. Advanced surface comes with it. An advanced surface ultimately will allow you to create very, very sophisticated surfaces. What it does is it really uses more of a mathematical, where you're actually creating curves and splines, and you're actually routing surfaces through there. If you look into some of these other licenses here, we sell a thing called Interactive Surface Design Extension. And as an industrial designer, ultimately what this does is it allows you to do more free form push and pull visual surface creation. I was talking to somebody yesterday that designs toilets for recreational vehicles. And guess what? You know, we have Kohler, we have American Standard, their customers. They're going to use something like this when you get into very, very complex shapes. You want to do a wing profile or something, you can use advanced surface. And then finally, almost finally, you do get welding, which allows you to actually place welds. You know, we deal with a lot of companies that have weldments, so they want to both put symbols as far as actually putting welds. One of the things you can do is what's called model-based definition, or I'm forgetting the actual term, but where you actually have a model and you're going to take several parts and you're going to unify that into one singular model. And then ultimately what comes with this is e-learning subscription. And e-learning is something that we used to sell $750 a year, whatever it used to be. It's now included with every license. E-learning is something that ultimately what's going to happen is that it's going to have the classes that we typically used to teach live in a center, what's called instructor-led training. And ultimately what's happening is that we're offering these where you take them via web browser. And these also have an ability to be context sensitive. So if you said, hey, I just want to show me how to create a surface, it'll take you to the classes of the example. So caveat on this one. So PTC is giving it away. They used to charge for it. This really has stopped development at Creo 6. It doesn't go beyond Creo 6. Is it good? Yeah, I think it's great for a reference, unless you're really a go-getter that wants to do something on their own. What's become very, very popular is what's called Learn Online. And we saw that for Creo, we saw it for Windchill. It's $1,200 per year, but it's an unlimited ability to take live, remote, instructor-led training as much as you want. It actually offers certification, and it actually goes through 3-hour increments. So it's not a whole day thing. It's at various time zones. It's a global thing. And it's really been a big hit because I think it allows people to get the training they need. People generally aren't going to travel to a training center today. Throw COVID in, that's another story. And I think it's bite-sized chunks to get people up the curve, but it's a way that we can actually measure and test and see how proficient they are or they aren't. And then finally, you get a home use license. So this was something that SolidWorks had. They don't have anymore. A lot of people like it. During the pandemic, a lot of people would VPN in. It wasn't an issue to grab licenses if they were floating. But if you're on the road, you're flying in a plane, this is a way to be able to get licenses, if you would. So that's what comes in a basic package. And just to try to touch on, I've kind of already covered this advanced assembly. I would tell you, if you really know Creo, you get advanced assembly. It's kind of a fundamental thing. As I'd mentioned before, 1998, it was offered in every package. It was stripped out, partially put in. There's nothing that you can't do in the base package. It just takes you a lot more steps to do it. But somebody that's really knowledgeable in Creo, they always typically get this. If you're designing a small part, limited number of a small product, limited number of assemblies, do you need it? Not necessarily. We do offer prismatics and multi-surface machining, which is milling up to 3-axis simultaneous. This package does have MathCAD in it. And really what, you can sort of see with this matrix where it sort of gets differentiated as far as the packages. And I hit interactive surface design. Behavioral modeling is something that it's not a very common thing that people use. It's really a neat thing for if you have the application. And it's a neat thing ultimately to be able to go out, and if there's a problem, let's say, where you want to get the part has to be at a specific volume when you're done, you can actually allow the system to go make changes with certain parameters that you allow it to change, and it will arrive at that specific goal of the volume. So there's a lot of neat stuff you can do with it, depending on what you're trying to do. Way back in the day, I remember we were doing something with stamping, and it was actually die stamping, where you were trying to make a fastener, And the die stamping, the 6 progressions of it, it had to have the same volume each time, and they were trying to design the tooling. Something like this is dynamite for that. We kind of covered mechanism dynamics. Additive manufacturing is interesting because, today people want different outputs. They want to have different lattice structures inside a part, and there are multiple capabilities of that. Of course, in the basic package, we have the ability to create a fundamental STL file. So that's what that does. Expert mold base, you create a cavity and core with tool design, if you would. These are the pins and the plates and things like that, Hasco, DME, etc., that you want to create the entire tool, which is really a machine. Layout is something that came from Co-Create, which is ultimately 2D top-down layout, which is when I worked at DuPont as an industrial designer, that's how we would lay out the machines we made for printing. Mold machining is something where it's volumetric milling that's going to remove very, very large quantities of material to hog that out. Tolerance analysis is something where ultimately you're trying to look at tolerance stack up. This is actually from Schematics, which is out, it used to be TI Tile back in the day. Talked a little bit about tool design. You got MathCAD. GD&T Advisor is interesting, is that I would say the average person does not really know how to place geometric dimensioning and tolerancing on drawings properly. What happens is that in the base packages of Creo, that capability exists. And ultimately, this is just a wizard, if you would, that helps you go through and instructs you if you're doing it incorrectly or correctly. GD&T is interesting because what you're getting into is the elimination now of 2D drawings, which has been a long time coming. And people are putting these directly on the model for what's called MBD, which is model-based definition. We work with a famous company called Mitutoyo, and this is the kind of stuff they look for because they're trying to inspect for quality and whatnot. So try to cover a couple more things here, guys, and then we'll wrap up and take some questions. But simulation's a big deal. This simulation right here ultimately is what used to be called Mechanica, RASNA back in the day. But there's 2 different options. There's advanced simulation, there's basic simulation. And what I would tell you is most people will buy this a la carte. We typically sell advanced simulation, which does come as floating, but that's going to create your, your structural. It does some thermal. It does not do fluid flow. Fluid flow was something that Creo lacked for a long, long time. And they've partnered up with Schematics. Somewhere I think there's CFD in here, Flow Analysis Plus and Flow Analysis here. So we have 3 different levels of computational fluid dynamics. This can do things like cavitation. Very, very sophisticated product. Where we see a lot of it is a lot of clients do electronic package products. This is a big deal because typically they don't do it. You're trying to fit more heat into a smaller box. It's a big deal. So that's what ultimately that simulation does. Fatigue Advisor goes the next step and tells you when something's going to fail. We kind of hit flow already. We already hit the collaboration. NC sheet metal, again, something that can be done a la carte. That's for punching and laser cutting of flat panel sheet metal. You get the lay flat up here with sheet metal, and then this helps you manufacture it. Production machining is 3-axis milling simultaneous, 4th and 5th axis positioning. Also has wire EDM, and it has turning. GD&T Advisor is got some additional functionality. I'm trying to think here, guys. You got Options Modeler, which is something that if you're going to do a lot of variants of your parts, this gives you the ability to do that. Complete machining is the same. It only offers full simultaneous 5-axis machining as opposed to 4th and 5th positioning, 4th and 5th axis positioning. Topology optimization is really neat. PTC acquired a company called Frustrum. They make a world-class generative design product, and that's ultimately what this is. Generative design is a big deal as you're going to less traditional manufacturing techniques. So last but not least, you'll see here, guys, we'll give you some pricing information. Everybody used to say Creo is hard to use. It's really expensive, but it's really, really sophisticated. So I really don't think Creo is hard to use today. I think PTC's done a lot in terms of interface and how to use the product. I won't argue and say it's not sophisticated because everybody knows it is. But what's interesting is that really when you compare the prices on an annual basis, it's not very expensive. So these two packages here come in node locked. These guys are only available as floating. And, I think Creo is an interesting product, unlike, SolidWorks, which you have to have your big brother, CATIA, help you out. This is one package. You can buy, 5 of these and 1 of these, and they'll all mesh together very, very nicely. The beauty is that this is one single scalable platform that has become very hot. One of the things, having done this, as Jeff said, for 30 years, Creo is growing at about a 15% rate per year, which is pretty astounding because the mechanical CAD market has historically grown 2 to 3%. So I would tell you right now, Creo is hot. It's red hot, and a lot of people are enjoying what it does. I think the packaging actually works pretty well. Just to explain a couple things here, and then I'll quit. But we do have certain promos that we have, like a lot of things. It's holiday time, it's sale time, so you can kind of read what those are. Buy one, get one half off. You can buy this, you can get free simulation or GD&T advisor, or if you want to get ISDX, you can take money off of that guy. So that's kind of what it is, guys. But Jeff, we're kind of at 45 minutes. There's a lot of information that I covered. And if you need the recording, we can send you that. We can send you this, and I'll open it up for questions now.
Great. Thank you, Gary. Awesome presentation. No questions in at the moment. Like Gary mentioned, we did record this. You'll receive a link to the recording later today. If you do have any follow-up questions, if you have questions about your current package or potentially any other functionality that you'd like to add to it, you can either respond to the email invite that you received for today's webinar. That comes directly to our Director of Sales Operations, Rob Romanowski. You can also always contact us by emailing info, I-N-F-O, @3hti.com, or call us directly. We're always here to help, and I don't see any questions coming in. So I just want to thank everybody again for joining us this morning. I want to thank Gary for his time. Very informative, a great amount of detail here. And we'll be sending out invitations for next week's webinar sessions tomorrow morning. So thank you again for joining, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jeff.